doing something you love. And I had enjoyed the rough and tumble of the business life. But, I think everybody in their 40s, I don't know if Mr. Garg also in his 40s asked himself the question, is this what life is all about? So it's a universal emotion, even if you are at the top of the heap, highly successful, secretary to the finance government, to the finance ministry, or whatever, CEO of a company, or you can be at the bottom of the heap. But everybody asks the same question. Is this what life is all about? And you guys here will also ask that same question. And so the answer to that question is not an easy one, and it relates to what my father was telling my mother when I came back from kindergarten, that yes, making a living is important, we all have to do it, but what is it about making a life? And in my case, when I asked this question, I had one advantage, and that is that I had asked this question soon after, a couple of years after joining VIX in my 20s. In fact, I was 22 when I asked this question. And my father had said at that time that, look, I was after Harvard and philosophy and all, the routine of business was getting a bit boring. And so he had said, why don't you do something on the weekend? You're working for a multinational, they respect your weekends. So you wear a Monday to Friday hat, and you can wear another hat on Saturday and Sunday. I'm still wearing a hat. Now I wear it because my head gets cold. I've lost my hair. But the point here is that I said at the age of 22 one morning on Sunday, I sat down and I said, I'm going to write a play. Now, I'd never written a play, never done anything like that. But I had the confidence. And that's what a life in books, a life at Harvard, was a life where you didn't just read a book, or the lecturer didn't just tell you what the book's all about, but you interrogated the book. In other words, you're not just hearing a lecture on Das Kapital of Karl Marx. You actually are asking questions. That's what you're encouraged to do. That's what builds confidence. So with that confidence at 22, I told myself, well, Shakespeare also must have sat down one morning like this when he sat down to write Hamlet. Now, only a lunatic will compare himself to Shakespeare. But confidence at 22, you're feeling tall and 6 feet, you're walking 6 inches above the ground, you can ask those questions. So I started writing. I wrote a play, luckily it won a big prize, 10,000 rupees in those days, a lot of money in 1963. And all the writers, most writers are starving writers, 10,000 was a lot of money. And so Kushwant Singh, Santa Rama Rao, R.K. Narayan, all these great names who were kind of my heroes had written for that competition, but I won the prize. Anyway, the play was successful. It was performed, it was done by Alec Padamsee in Bombay, and it got performed on BBC at the Edinburgh Festival. So I had a second career. And so I wrote another play called On Mirabai. This is when I was transferred to the world headquarters in New York. I'm 25 now when I write that play, and as experimental theatre took it up, and the director converted it into a Meera bhajans. Can you believe this? Meerabai's bhajans. He converted them to hard rock music, and it was a success. I mean, this is the guy, by the way, who did a play, who did the same thing. He did to a play called Jesus Christ Superstar. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. In the 1970s, it was a big hit. Anyway, I had a second career of sorts that was, and I continued this. I wrote a novel in my 30s, and a partition novel called A Fine Family, which is, by the way, still selling. Penguin is selling quite well of it. The point is, when I asked this question in my 40s, I already had since I'd had success in another career. My wife said, well, what are you going to do if you quit this job? I said, I'll write. And she said, you mean I'm going to become the wife of a starving writer now? I mean, she says, we are earning a lot of money here. I was at the world headquarters and I had a high job. And I said, we've earned enough. We've got enough savings. And I showed her that if we invested our money well, this would be our expenses, this would be our income. And so our standard of living would not go up anymore, but it won't go too far down. So you have to not worry about being a wife of a starving writer. Anyway, long and short, I quit, became a writer, and for 30 years I was an executive, and 30 years I've been a writer. And so at the end of the story, all I can tell you is a few lessons here. You've got an inkling of what my father was talking about, making a life. And what does it mean? I still, as I said, don't know. In fact, the other day I read a quotation from Seneca, the Roman writer, who said, he was running the Roman Empire, this guy, Seneca, and then he goes and has an affair with the emperor's wife, and so he's caught, and ultimately he's going to be killed. And what does he say at the end? While I was busy, life passed me by. Now he's talking about life. What is that life he is talking about? And what is it, that life that my father had in mind? And so it's hard to define what it is, but all I can tell you is that when you're not taking yourself too seriously, when you've forgotten yourself, it's already 12 o'clock. I thought it was 10 o'clock. So for 2 hours, time got distorted. It's a little bit like somebody asked a question to Tendulkar when he was approaching his famous double century at the end of his career. They asked him, how did it feel like when you were getting close to the double century? And he says, I don't know. I wasn't even there. By then the ball had become so big and the bat had become so big, the bat was just hitting the ball by itself. Now that's a clue. Actually it's called being in the zone. Psychologists call this notion of flow. But making a life is when you're so absorbed, you've forgotten yourself. So it's the art of self-forgetting. You don't care who gets the credit. This is the advice Krishna gave to Arjuna in the Mahabharata, also in the Gita, about Nishkam Karma. That act for the sake of the action rather than thinking about your next promotion. If I do this, will it get me the next promotion? Anyway, that's basically the end of my story. I can only tell you, as a person who's been a writer and a business executive, I have concluded that actually business people are nicer than writers. And why? Because business people are instinctively understand that they depend on others. And being good is basically your relationship with another human being. And so, basic thing is, a business person has customers, suppliers, employees. And the business person knows that you have to satisfy customers. You have to be fair to your suppliers. You don't try to squeeze them too hard because you'll get hurt. You'll get a bad component. And you've got to be fair to the employees, because the best people from TEDxKiroriMalCollege will not go and work for a guy who fills his company up with nephews and sons. So that's really, and a writer doesn't need anyone. I write from 6 to 12 every day, and I don't do email in the morning, no WhatsApp in the morning, except today, coming to you guys in Kirorimal when I almost missed the cab that I was on. Anyway, thank you all very much.